Sunday before Christmas, and I'm dreaming of an NFC North Division Championship and a first-round bye. Packers Vikings Monday Night Football. The stakes are very simple. If Green Bay wins, they are your NFC North champions for 2019 and for the first time since 2016, and they'll be in the driver's seat to clinch a first-round bye next week. If they lose, it gets a little complicated, and we'll talk more about those as this show progresses. I am your host today. I am Jacob Westendorf. A showdown with the Vikings 2 days before Christmas. What more could you possibly ask for? And joined with me, upbeat Lollipop himself with his playoff machine predictor, which is a toy that is used far too often, but nonetheless, he has it. Jason Perrone. Jason, is Santa visiting JJ soon, or do you guys have him for Christmas, or what's the deal with that?
He is here, and he will be getting a visit. And who better and who more to be overindulging with some sort of a gadget than myself? So, yes, I have been living on the ESPN playoff machine for the better part of the last couple weeks. What more could I ask for, you say? I could ask for the Packers to not have to play the Vikings so close to Christmas with a chance to change the holiday. I would never let it ruin the holiday, but it could change the holiday. So that I'm not down with, but I'm going to remain upbeat, Lollipop, and say, all right, Packers can do this. They've got it all right in front of them. At least they control whether or not, they do what they do. Some things changed after yesterday. So we were recording this on Sunday. So some things changed yesterday, Saturday, based on the results of a game that took place. But it's Christmas time, man. Got to be festive.
Yeah, it's 10 minutes to 2 right now, so some of these games are kicking off the middle of the third quarter here. Saints and Titans does not mean that much in terms of the Packers. The Packers' chances at the 1 seed, their most realistic path to the 1 seed, took a pretty significant hit last night with the Los Angeles Rams blowing a game, and that's really the only way to put it, against the San Francisco 49ers. Robbie Gould hit a field goal at the buzzer. The realistic path would have been the Niners to lose to the Rams, and then the Niners to beat Seattle next week while Green Bay wins both of their games. If that happened, Green Bay could be the 1 seed. Since that's not going to happen, Green Bay needs Seattle to lose to the Arizona Cardinals, which I think Jason's response pretty well sums that up, that's not going to happen. But let's start with what is, I think a lot of us had kind of gone with the idea that the 1 seed was very unrealistic. An outside chance at very best at this point. So the 2 seed. Tomorrow night's game is essentially a playoff game. Green Bay wins, and they'll have a chance to advance to the second round simply by beating a bad Detroit Lions team. If they lose, they'll probably be the 3 seed and have to face Minnesota and beat them again at home. I don't know about you guys. I want to avoid any and all chances of playing a team for a third time in a season. I, for one, this is just a personal thing, I think division playoff games are incredibly lame, unless it's later in the playoffs. But to play Minnesota twice in 3 weeks, I don't think that would be very fun. And I think that there's more interesting matchups that could be had. 2, obviously, 29 of the last 38 Super Bowl participants, so you guys can do the math, have been a 1 or a 2 seed. So if Green Bay wants to get to the Super Bowl, their best and most realistic chance is to be the 2 seed and beat Minnesota tomorrow night in Minnesota and then finish off the Lions here next week. Now, there is a path for Green Bay to lose and still get the 2 seed. If Green Bay loses to Minnesota, rebounds and beats Detroit, they would need the Saints to lose to the Carolina Panthers. The Panthers, last I checked, were losing 21-3 to a bad Colts team and are starting a rookie mid-round quarterback in Will Grier. Let's just go ahead and say that's probably not realistic. Okay, so before we get into too many playoff scenarios, let's talk about the game at hand, because realistically, the easiest chance for the Packers is just to win. And they now have to win and exercise a demon that is U.S. Bank Stadium. The Packers have never won there. They've played 3 games there. The first time they played there, Aaron Rodgers threw an interception on the last offensive play of the game to Trey Waynes late in the fourth quarter. The Vikings were able to kneel out the clock. So Green Bay did not win that night. The next year was the Anthony Barr game where Barr hits Rodgers. Rodgers breaks his collarbone. Packers season essentially ended right there. And then last season, Green Bay wasn't very good. They were banged up. Minnesota wasn't great, but they had a vast majority of their guys, and they were better than the Packers were. And they won. They were up by 10 points later in the game and ended up winning that game as well. So the Packers have never won there. And realistically, they've never actually played well in that stadium either. Now, if you want to throw out the game that Rodgers broke his collarbone, I think that's fair because throwing Brett Hundley in the middle of a hostile environment like that, that Vikings team would end up playing for the NFC Championship that year. So that was a very good football team. And Green Bay had to deal with the shock of losing their all-world MVP quarterback. That's fair. The other two games, however, they haven't played well in that stadium. And it's a poor matchup, or at least it has been. The Vikings' speed. The Vikings tend to play well at home. I think that somebody said they're 27-7 since they've opened that building, playing at US Bank Stadium. They're a very good home team, and the Vikings this year, for as much talk as there is about the top seeds being Arizona. Wow, yeah, right, good one. New Orleans, San Francisco, Seattle, Green Bay, Minnesota's 10-4, so they're a very good team too. They'll be one of the better 6 seeds, assuming that's where they end up in very recent memory. They're a very good team. The first time these two teams played, the Packers won 21-16 at home. They jumped out to a 21-0 lead and were able to hold on throughout the rest of the game. Kevin King with a big interception in the back of the end zone to end up getting that win for the Packers and run the clock out. So that is the history, if you will, behind this game. Jason, just to start, before we dig into the why, where's your confidence level at this point with these two teams facing off?
It's 50-50. I think the Packers have just as good a chance to win as the Vikings do. Dalvin Cook won't play. He's been ruled out already, which is interesting because Mike Zimmer typically likes to mess around with everybody, especially the Packers. And
he did that all week too.
Hold it close to. That's what I'm. He heated up like we weren't going to find out till 90 minutes before game time, and then we find out yesterday from Adam Schefter that Dalvin Cook will not play. I think the Packers have they have as good a chance to win this game as they have in any of the previous 3. So I don't think that it's far-fetched at all that they get a win in Minnesota. It's just gonna come down to playing on the road, and some of these players that are struggling stepping up. You've got some young players that aren't used to playing in games like this. If you think about the rookies over the last 2 seasons, really haven't been in a situation like this before. So I think some of that stuff can matter. But when you've got the leadership that they do, Zadarius Smith, Preston Smith, Aaron Rodgers, those guys in the locker room, I think that kind of Jimmy Graham, that kind of helps mitigate some of that stuff. So I'm not necessarily worried about it. We have to wait for the game to play itself out. And the thing that is sticking out in my mind, because I always have a thing that sticks out in my mind, is that this is when it becomes important to remember that a football game comes down to 7 or 8 plays. And so which way are those 7 or 8 plays going to go? They have not gone the Packers' way in that building the first 3 times. We'll see eventually. I will tell you this right now. The Packers are eventually going to win a game there. So there's no better time than this season. But with both teams, needing to kind of keep up and do everything they can to keep themselves in position, Minnesota's going to throw everything in the kitchen sink at Green Bay. They have to be ready for it.
Yeah, they will. And I mean, this game means a little bit less to the Vikings than what it did before that Rams game kicked off. The Vikings still needed to win to get into the playoffs with the Rams losing. The Vikings are officially in. The NFC playoff picture is set. It's just a matter of which crappy NFC East team wins that division, if it's the Eagles or if it's the Cowboys, and we may have an answer to that here in the next couple of hours. But we don't have that answer right now. The Vikings are in. They can be the 6, they can be the 5, they can still be the 2, and they can be the 3 if Green Bay were to lose these next 2 games, obviously, as well. That being said, I think that you brought up a lot of good points in there. I think the first thing is it's kind of interesting, I guess, that the Packers haven't played well with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback in that building, just because this isn't like the Metrodome with Brett Favre, where the Packers historically struggled in that building
Or
with
Dallas.
quarterback, or Dallas, but they were able to win a lot of games in the Metrodome with Rodgers at quarterback. Whereas it didn't matter. I mean, the Packers' best team, maybe in the history of their franchise, was that 1996 Packers team, and they lost in Minnesota by 10 points.
Mm-hmm.
And that game wasn't particularly close. So this isn't that level. They've won games in Minnesota before. It's just a tough place to play, and you've heard them talk about it. Matt LaFleur's talked about it. Aaron Rodgers talked about it this week. A lot of the guys have talked about how it's a tough place to play. And this is the biggest game that a lot of Packers players have played in. Now, Adrian Amos has played in the playoffs. Zadarius Smith has played in the playoffs. Preston Smith has played in the playoffs. Aaron Rodgers obviously has played in the Super Bowl. Jimmy Graham has played in high-level playoff games. Same with Devontae Adams. But there's a lot of guys, Jair Alexander, Kenny Clark, Kevin King, Darnell Savage. I mean, there's a lot of dudes on this Packers team that have not played in a game of this magnitude. And I'm going to say this game is bigger than the 49ers game that took place, 4 to 6 weeks ago. Because, yes, that game mattered from a seeding standpoint, but this game, we know what's in front of them now. They win this game, they're more likely than not the 2 seed, and all they have to do is beat Detroit to advance to the second round of the postseason. They lose, things get a little hairier. You have to beat Detroit to win the division, whereas if you win this game on Monday, that division's locked up. You've guaranteed yourself at least one home playoff game before having to potentially go on the road. I think that Green Bay may have some issues with that lack of experience with some of their best players. Now, how much that matters remains to be seen. The biggest matchup that you talked about, Dalvin Cook's not going to play. Alexander Mattison, their second stringer, looks like he's not going to play either. It's going to be Boone is going to be their running back. Mike Boone is their starter. They do play in that scheme, that system that Gary Kubiak once employed from Mike Shanahan over in Denver, where they just plug dudes in and they ran for 1,200 yards. That's just how it worked. They're in a good matchup against Green Bay. Green Bay's had its troubles against the run, although the last month of the season so far, they've ranked 8th in the NFL in yards per carry. Before that, they ranked 28th in the NFL in yards per carry. So whether that's improvement, crappy teams they're playing, whatever the case is, Green Bay has done better against the run in recent weeks, and Kenny Clark's improvement in the health department has been something that's been really helpful there. And he dominated this first matchup against Minnesota. It was him and Dean Lowry. I know Cook had that big 75-yard run, and eventually the Packers' offense stalled out so much to the point where
that was sad. I think Savage he learned a lesson on that play.
Oh yeah, definitely. But the defense eventually tired out a little bit, but they did a decent enough job on Dalvin Cook. The big thing is they controlled that line of scrimmage for the most part throughout that game, and that is why they won more than any other reason. Dean Lowry did a very good job playing those bootlegs on play actions that Kirk Cousins has. I think you'll see a lot of the same. The Packers are going to tell their defensive linemen to stay disciplined on those kinds of plays, and that's what they're going to have to do. On the offensive side of the ball, I think it's that simple, and then it's their 2 outside guys and our 2 outside guys, Jair Alexander and Stephon Diggs, and Kevin King and Adam Thielen. Now, I say it that way because if I were the D coordinator, that's the matchup I would prefer. I would prefer Alexander to be matched up with Diggs more so than Thielen, and King to be matched up with Thielen more so than Diggs. Diggs just seems like the type of receiver that can give Kevin King fits, and frankly, both of those guys have had a pretty decent amount of success against Green Bay in their time as Vikings. So that's what it comes down to, I think. A lot is going to be made of Kirk Cousins is 0-8 on Monday Night Football. Well, wins aren't a quarterback stat. He played pretty well when they played Seattle. None of that is going to matter. And realistically, if you want to look at it that way, Aaron Rodgers hasn't exactly played well on road primetime games in recent memory either. I know that they won in Kansas City, and that's a tough place to play, and they can't take those wins away, but you can also look and say that team was banged up. They were missing their best pass rusher, their left tackle, and the best starting quarterback in all of football, in Patrick Mahomes. So with that being said, Jason, let's look You mentioned Dalvin Cook's not going to play. You mentioned all of those things. When Green Bay's on defense, what do you think their biggest key is to slowing down this Vikings offense?
Well, you mentioned the domination up front. And the interesting thing about that is that they only had 1 sack that game. But Kirk Cousins did throw 2 interceptions in that game as well. He's never, well, not never, he has not thrown multiple interceptions in a game outside of that this season. So they were clearly able to affect the pocket and his decision making, and for whatever it's worth. In week 2, the teams both had a lot of confidence and a lot to play for, and everybody was running full speed. And so I don't hand out any hall passes for why something didn't go well. I'm going to give credit to the other side. So the Packers defense played well there, and they created pressure. You mentioned staying home. I made a joke on yesterday's Pack-A-Day podcast with Mark Eckel that Kirk Cousins also had his highest rushing total of the season against the Packers, which was a whopping 17 yards. And so while he does not run a lot, that's one thing that the Packers are going to have to keep an eye on. Now, the nice thing is last week, I think the Packers did a pretty good job of keeping Mitchell Trubisky in check. In fact, Kenny Clark actually kind of, held Trubisky from a big gain and actually kept up with him sideline to sideline. And Kirk Cousins is no Mitchell Trubisky. If there's anything that where you don't want to be compared, or you do want to be compared to Mitch Trubisky, it's with regards to your speed, and Kirk Cousins does not have it. So the discipline's going to be important. Adam Thielen's back. He didn't play particularly much or well last week against the Chargers. I think he was just coming back to get some reps in anticipation of this week. I expect him to be his usual self. The Packers have not really gotten a break when it comes to players being out this season. They beat the Chiefs on the road with no Pat Mahomes, but outside of that, whenever there's been a key guy that's been out, they haven't really necessarily been able to take a ton of advantage of that. Unless you want to consider, Tyron Smith missing the Dallas game, and the Packers dominated the hell out of the Cowboys all day anyway. So I don't necessarily think that Cook being out or Thielen missing a bunch of games is going to be a big key. So the secondary, very important. Whether it's Kevin King, Jair Alexander, Darnell Savage, I'm still waiting for Darnell Savage to make a huge game-changing play. This week would be a perfect time for that to happen because you've got Stephon Diggs, who always has good games against the Packers. Thielen I mentioned, Kyle Rudolph, who's becoming also ran because he's just kind of getting phased out. They drafted Irv Smith Jr. with their first pick this past draft. So it's Rudolph's kind of being phased out, but he still tends to show up and have good games against Green Bay. I think they're going to be ready to go. So on the defensive side, I think it's going to come down to discipline. And if there's a play in front of them, and there's a play to be made, they have to make it. They can't drop interceptions. They can't miss tackles. They've got to wrap up. If they've got a sack, they can't be a quarter of a second late. They've got to finish and make the plays. When you're on the road, it literally half a second is a lifetime, and they've got to take advantage of what's in front of them.
Yeah, that's the big thing, I think, is if Cousins is going to throw you a couple, you've got to catch him. You've got to make those plays on the ball. Green Bay did in the first game of the season. Preston Smith, Kevin King both caught passes that were thrown to them. That was a positive. You got to keep the big plays down because this Vikings team really wants to give you death by 1,000 paper cuts. I think it's hard to do that against Mike Pettine's defense. That's why the Vikings were only able to score 16 points. And their 2 big plays led to some of the – Stephon Diggs had a big touchdown, and Chad Beebe had a big run on kind of a broken play.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, that led to 10 of their points. 9. Dan Bailey missed the extra point because Diggs forgot that you can't take your helmet off in the middle of the field. So good for them. I think this is an even matchup. I think the Packers defense is pretty good. I think the Vikings obviously have some players on offense as well. The equalizer is going to be, can Minnesota's offensive line give Kirk Cousins enough time against this Packers pass rush of Zadarius Smith, Preston Smith, Kenny Clark, and I'm going to give a little reference to Rashawn Gary because he had a couple nice rushes last week against Chicago. So, and Kyler Fackrell too. I mean, the Packers have a good pass rush. It's a matter of can they get home with 4 men, because if you start blitzing Cousins, that's when some of those dudes, there's some holes open, and the ability for those guys to make some big plays. The mismatch, I think, is on when Green Bay's on offense. and I know Mike Zimmer talked about it this week, how one of him or Aaron Rodgers has to retire and get out of the division. And it's because Rodgers is so damn good, according to Mike Zimmer. And that's a great compliment. Mike Zimmer is one of the best defensive coaches in all of football. That being said, personnel wise, it's not positive for Green Bay. Minnesota's biggest weakness is in their secondary, which is cool, but Green Bay doesn't necessarily have the receivers to take advantage of that when you're looking for more this week, according to Matt LaFleur, more Jake Kumaro, potentially more Alan Lazard, and maybe less Geronimo Allison and Marquez Valdez-Scantling. And that might matter. Kumaro is one of those players that it's strange, but whenever he's been on the field, he makes plays. And maybe that matters. Or maybe it's a one-game, one-play, fluky, lucky sample kind of size. That's possible too. I don't know, but I do know that I've been tired of watching Geronimo Allison for 15 weeks. So I guess that's the way that we're going to go with Allison. And Lazard has made some nice plays, obviously, as well. But those guys, it's not, we're not talking about Jordy Nelson, Greg Jennings, and Randall Cobb here. We're talking about Jake Kumaro and Alan Lazard. That's where the mismatch is. The other thing that can be interesting, Minnesota, they pump that crowd noise in artificially because they're losers. That's all I'm going to say about that. So they pump that crowd noise in. Green Bay has to go silent count, and that gives their pass rushers, which are very good, Everson Griffin, Daniil Hunter, very good pass rushers. Their linebackers are very good at blitzing. Eric Kendricks, Anthony Barr, those guys can get after the quarterback as well. They've got some good interior rushers. That pass rush, when your offensive line is a half a step slower, the emphasis this week has to be get the ball out.
Yep.
You can't hold the ball in Minnesota because their pass rush is very good and your protection can't hold up. The ball has got to come out of your hands. And Rodgers, whether for receivers not being open, whether for unwillingness to play that way, whether unable to see what player is open on a given play, the ball has to come out. They can't afford for him to play sandlot scramble ball any longer, especially this week against Minnesota. And they're pretty good against the run. So Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams, they had some success the last time these two teams played, but for the most part, it's tough sledding against the Vikings defense. Jason, when it comes to Minnesota versus Green Bay, what matchup has you worried the most?
I think it's the receivers, like you mentioned. And the other thing is maybe it's Aaron Rodgers against the pass rush, because a couple times a game, Rodgers holds onto the ball, and this learning the offense is a work in progress. I don't care if he's a 14, 15-year vet, he's still learning a new offense, and they've learned on the fly. And so I do think we do need to feel fortunate as fans that they've won as many games as they have with him kind of working through some of these kinks. And he's got some old habits too. An interesting point was made on Twitter. I think Aaron Nagler was a part of the conversation too, which had to do with the play clock. And that is that if you're a pass rusher and you've already got the advantage of the crowd noise to your, going in your favor, and the offensive line is going to be a step slower, then if you know that when the play clock gets down to 0 that you can just tee off and just knock the hell out of the guy in front of you, whether they snap the ball or they don't, it's either going to be a penalty or you getting to the quarterback quicker. So the point that was made was this goes back to Brian Urlacher talking about how Aaron Rodgers used to take the play clock all the way down against the Bears of yesteryear because he wanted them to show their defense, so he knew exactly what formation they were going to be in, and then he would just go out and beat it anyway. Well, defensive coordinators and defenses in the NFL, as they always do, have caught up with that and have disguised and learned to discipline their disguise until the end, and then make a very last-minute adjustment, and they practice that during the week so it's fresh and they can pull it off during the game and they're effective. So if the Packers if Rodgers is going to take that play clock down all the way down to 0, he's not going to do himself a lot of favors against those very speedy pass rushers. I mean, Daniil Hunter, we know who Daniil Hunter is. I don't think he's getting anywhere near as much credit as he should league-wide because he's the fastest player to 50 sacks in the history of the NFL. There's a reason for that. There's a huge advantage to playing in that bird killer, box stapler, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, they pump noise in there. And listen, if the league isn't going to step in and do anything about it, then why not? If that is going to be permissible, then maybe the Packers should think about doing the same thing at Lambeau Field if they're not already. I'm not saying, I'm just saying. So that the penalties on offense, the burning of timeouts too early, those things, that kind of stuff can't happen in a game like this. And the other thing, Jake, and I'm sure you would agree with this, is you cannot let Minnesota wreck this game early. You can't get off to, the Packers receive the opening kickoff and they go a quick 3 and out and they get in way minus territory and J.K. Scott's punting from the back of the end zone right out of the gate. You just killed the field position game and you got to make it up somehow. You don't want to be in the minus side of the equation on the road in that building, especially early on. So I don't want to see by the end of the first quarter the Packers having to sled uphill. It's not going to be a good story. Not going to be a happy ending if they have to do that.
No, and to the Packers' credit, slow starts haven't really. I mean, they have in some games, obviously. L.A., well, that wasn't even really a slow start as much as it was a no start. San Francisco, they got off to a slow start, and then kind of couldn't recover because they were, like you said, sledding uphill. That hasn't really been an issue, but it really can't be one tomorrow. That fast start is paramount. Keeping yourself in control of the game, and then the big thing for Green Bay this year has been sustaining that. The fast starts have been great, but they're just as likely to score 3 straight touchdowns on drives as they are to go 3 and out 4 consecutive drives in a given game as well. So those are the kind of lulls that you can't afford in playoff games, and that's really what this is. I mean, it's a chance for Green Bay, like we said, to essentially give themselves a chance to beat one bad team on the road and secure a bye. And it's that simple. They haven't played well on the road in recent years. This year's been better. No doubt about that, which is a big reason why they're 11-3. But consistency is key, and Aaron Rodgers has said that. Matt LaFleur said that. This isn't anything that they don't know. It's just a matter of putting that into practice on the field and making the plays that are in front of them. There are going to be plays to be made. They have to make them. It's a big-time game. Packers haven't won a lot of games like these in recent memory. That's why they haven't made the playoffs. That's why they haven't been back to a Super Bowl, all kinds of things like that. They have a chance to sweep this division as well, which would be a really solid reminder for the rest of this division that you kicked us while we were down for 2 years. Now we have an opportunity to take it back, and we're going to take it back with a vengeance, and we're going to do that by going 6-0 in this division and reminding you who runs this thing as far as the NFC North goes. It's prediction time. Jason, Packers, Vikings, Monday Night Football on ESPN. They will be in Minnesota. Packers have a chance to give themselves an opportunity to clinch a first-round bye with a win. How do you see this game playing out?
You guys know me very well. You know how I be. So I don't think this game's going to get out of hand. And even if it does, I think the Packers are going to do what they do. They're going to make a game of it. It's going to be valiant. I believe in Matt LaFleur and his leadership in order to keep everything close. I just have a hard time picking Green Bay to win in a venue they haven't won in. It's a different team this year, so I have a lot of reasons to go with them. But I see this one finishing like 23-21. I've got Minnesota still pulling it out. But, again, it's the 2 seed's important, and you made the point earlier about that. The Packers, I don't know if this Packers team would benefit from a bye as much as they wouldn't. So, it's not fun to lose a game in Minnesota. I'd love to exercise the demon. I just don't see it playing itself out. But this team's going to the playoffs, and they're going to beat Detroit in Week 17 and win this division. So they're a 3 seed, and they host a game at Lambeau and Wild Card Weekend. That's the worst case scenario that comes out of it.
And probably against Minnesota in that regard. It's a big game. It's going to be billed as Aaron Rodgers against Kirk Cousins, but the reality is that's not how this game works, even if it is how we talk about things very, very often. My partner often says that this is a game about matchups. I mentioned earlier, I don't like this matchup at all. I got a hard time seeing. I think that quick passing game for Cousins is going to be helpful. I think that they can find some holes in that Green Bay secondary if they can hold up well enough in protection. And in that building, with an offense for Green Bay that is below average, I really struggle to see Green Bay winning and, frankly, keeping it close. I think this could be one of those games where it's close for a while, but the offense's inability to do anything eventually tires out the defense, and they have a play that breaks the dam, so to speak. I like Minnesota 27-7. I really don't.
Oh,
I know a lot of people are going to say division game, it should be close. All that. I just have that kind of feeling that it's not going to be a great day for this Packers offense, and especially true in that building. Their offense has never played well there. They do have some matchups they can exploit. I understand that. But ultimately, it's about protecting the quarterback, and I don't know if they're going to be able to do that on that fast track with that crowd noise. And let's face it, I mean, we could say that, the game's not as important to Minnesota. It's the Packers. That is the Minnesota Vikings version of the Super Bowl. The highlight of their franchise is Anthony Barr breaking the Packers quarterback's collarbone because they're a sad, pathetic waste of a franchise. But that being said, I like Minnesota, and I like them kind of big tomorrow night. I haven't seen, even under LaFleur to some degree, a big game on the road in prime time. And like I said, I know they beat Kansas City, but I've given kind of the context to that. I haven't seen them win a game like that in a long time. And more often than not, those games have turned into ass whippings in recent years. So I kind of think that's what's on the dock for tomorrow night. So hopefully that doesn't ruin your guys' Christmas. We here at the Pulse of the Pack want to wish everybody a very happy holiday season, Christmas, Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, whatever you celebrate, doesn't matter to me. Happy times with you guys and your family and your loved ones. Thank you guys for listening into this all off season, all regular season, and now this year, the postseason. Hopefully the Packers can rebound and still win that division a week later and get a home playoff game and a chance for some revenge against those Vikings. But that's the way we got to go. And Jason has Minnesota by a small margin. I have Minnesota by a big margin. Check us out on YouTube. We're Pulse of the Pack. Check us out on Twitter at Packer Pulse. Check out Jason. He's at Jason Perrone. Check out me. I'm at Jacob Westendorf. Thank you guys for listening to the show each and every week. And as always, go Pack, go.